let's talk about something that almost no one dares to say out loud. Sometimes when an avoidant disappears, it's not rejection, it's love in its most misunderstood form. And I know how crazy that sounds, because how can someone love you and vanish? How can someone feel deeply and pull away right when things are getting beautiful? Here's the truth. They're not running away from you. They're running from the intensity that you awaken in them. You see, for avoidance, emotional closeness doesn't feel safe. It feels dangerous. Their nervous system interprets love not as comfort, but as a loss of control. Because love requires vulnerability. It demands openness. It forces the emotional walls they spent their entire life constructing to start cracking. And let me tell you something. When someone has built their identity around emotional independence, those cracks feel like collapse. Now, most people interpret this pulling away as fear, and while fear is part of it, it's not the whole story. What if I told you that the depth of their withdrawal is directly proportional to the depth of their feelings? That their vanishing act doesn't signal disinterest, but rather that you've reached a level inside them where no one else ever has. This isn't fear in the way we usually understand it. This is love without a roadmap. An avoidant doesn't run when it's easy. They don't run when they're uninterested. They run when something feels too good, when the experience is so real, so emotionally arresting, that they suddenly feel naked in front of someone who has the power to break them. That's when they vanish, not to punish you, but to protect the only thing left that feels like safety, their emotional autonomy. And here's what most people miss. When an avoidant disappears after a deeply connected moment, that's not them rejecting the moment. That's them trying to preserve it. It's like standing in front of a sunset so beautiful that you can't even look at it for too long. The beauty is overwhelming. The emotion is too raw. And instead of basking in it, they retreat from it because the risk of losing it feels unbearable. Think of it like this. Someone who grew up in an emotional drought doesn't know what to do when it starts raining. You offer them warmth, depth, connection, and their first instinct isn't to soak it in, it's to build shelter. Not because they don't want the rain, but because they've never believed the storm wouldn't drown them. So when they pull away, it's not always about fear of you, it's fear of what you activate in them. You become the mirror that reflects back everything they bury, their unmet needs, their forgotten vulnerability, their longings for connection that they've suppressed under layers of self-reliance. And that mirror, it's blinding, it's uncomfortable, it's intimate in a way that's almost unbearable. But let's be honest, this doesn't excuse emotional abandonment. It doesn't justify silence or stonewalling, but it helps us understand that what looks like distance can paradoxically be proof of depth. You're not being pushed away because you didn't matter. You're being pushed away because for the first time you did. And sometimes the most honest form of love an avoidant can give is retreat. Because in their mind, getting too close means getting hurt. And getting hurt means losing you. So in their emotional equation, disappearing becomes a warped form of preservation. Not just of self, but of you, of the moment of the magic that they don't yet feel worthy of holding. Now, this doesn't mean you chase them. It doesn't mean you justify their absence. But it does mean you stop personalizing their withdrawal. You stop telling yourself stories that you weren't enough. Because often it's not about you at all. It's about the battlefield inside them where love and fear are at war. So the next time someone pulls away right after things get beautiful, don't jump to the conclusion that they don't care. Sometimes that disappearing act is the most terrified form of love there is. And maybe, just maybe, it's not fear at all. It's love that doesn't yet know how to stay. The real challenge isn't decoding their distance. It's recognizing that sometimes love shows up disguised as silence, and only the emotionally mature can hear it. Let's explore something that most people completely misunderstand about avoidance. They don't detach because they've stopped caring. They detach because they care in a way they don't know how to process. They're not ignoring you. They're observing you quietly, closely, carefully. Not because they're cold, but because closeness to them feels like standing too close to a fire. They're drawn to it. But if they stay too long, they burn. This is the part that confuses so many people. You think when they go silent, when they don't reach out, when they seem distant, that it means indifference. But the avoidant is actually hyper-attuned. They feel everything. In fact, they feel it so deeply that it overwhelms their emotional circuitry. So what do? They step back, they analyze, they scan, they try to make sense of the chaos of connection without having to be in it. It's a paradox. Because while you're aching to be seen, they're studying you from afar. While you're wondering why they're not reaching out, they're replaying the last thing you said again and again, like a mental movie reel. Not because they're bored or dismissive, but because the bond matters to them more than they'll ever let on. You have to understand, the avoidant doesn't trust closeness because they've been programmed, often since childhood, to associate intimacy with pain, unpredictability, or loss of control. So instead of engaging in real time, they create emotional distance. Not out of malice, but out of self-protection. And from that distance, they can feel safe while still staying emotionally connected, just not in a way most people recognize. This is why they follow your stories, check your profile, keep tabs on your life without always reaching out. They want to feel close, but they don't want to feel exposed. That digital distance becomes their emotional buffer. Watching from afar gives them a sense of connection without the risk of rejection, without the pressure to perform, without the fear of being overwhelmed. But here's where it gets deeper. What looks like apathy is actually silent loyalty. What looks like indifference is often emotional restraint. The avoidant knows that if they allow themselves to fully engage, fully feel, fully step into the relationship, they might lose control. And for someone who's built their emotional safety on control, that's terrifying. They would rather stay in the shadows of your life than risk losing the light altogether. They would rather be an outsider looking in than risk being inside and getting hurt. It's not that they don't want to connect. It's that the way they connect doesn't fit the standard template. They connect through watching, through remembering, through proximity without pressure. And that's the tragedy of the avoidance love. It's often invisible. They won't flood you with text. They won't make grand declarations. But they'll remember the way your voice shifted when you were nervous. They'll recall the small details you forgot you mentioned. They'll replay the last time you laughed together, not once, but 10 times, because that moment to them felt safe. And safety to an avoidant is more rare than love itself. Most people will miss this. Most people will walk away because the affection doesn't come in familiar packaging, but those who can see beyond the surface, those who recognize the subtle devotion in their silence, will see something far more powerful than words. They stayed emotionally tethered even while physically distant. Now, this doesn't mean you settle for breadcrumbs. It doesn't mean you tolerate inconsistency, but it does mean that sometimes silence has a deeper message. Sometimes space is a language. And sometimes love doesn't knock on your door, it watches from across the street, just to make sure you're okay. So if you're dealing with an avoidant who keeps their distance, but never truly disappears, ask yourself, is this absence or is this their version of presence? Because the avoidant often expresses love not with closeness, but with watchfulness. Not with words, but with consistency from the shadows. The most important relationships are often the ones we don't fully understand at first. And if you're willing to look beyond the surface, if you're willing to feel the message behind their silence, you might just realize they were never gone, they were always there, just at a distance that felt safe enough to love you the only way they knew how. Love doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers from across the room, and only those who know how to listen will ever truly hear it. Let's talk about one of the most confusing behaviors people experience in relationships with avoidance. They start arguments, create emotional distance, or seem to sabotage the very connection they were once enjoying. And on the surface, it feels like rejection. It feels like they've stopped caring. But what if I told you the exact opposite might be true? What if those intense moments of pushback aren't about pushing you away, but about testing if you'll still be there? You see, for avoidance, emotional closeness is a double-edged sword. It feels good, yes, but it also feels terrifying. Because to an avoidant, closeness triggers the memory of past experiences where intimacy wasn't safe. It reminds them of a time when being vulnerable led to pain, control, abandonment, or suffocation. So when the connection starts to feel too real, too comfortable, too intimate, they don't lean in, they lean out fast. And here's where it gets deep. That pulling back, that sudden irritation, that you're too much moment, it's not because they don't feel something for you. It's because they do. And that's what threatens their emotional operating system. They're not trying to destroy the bond, they're trying to survive it. Because deep love for them isn't a safe place. It's a high voltage emotional zone where they're unsure if they'll lose control or lose themselves. So they test, they provoke, they pull away, not to hurt you, but to see if you'll stay. It's an unconscious defense mechanism. If I act cold, if I push them a little, if I withdraw just enough, will they chase? Will they get angry? Will they abandon me like everyone else did? Or will they prove that they're safe? The avoidant is looking for consistency in a world that's taught them to expect abandonment. Let's call this what it really is, a loyalty test wrapped in emotional sabotage. And no, it's not healthy. It's not fair to you, but it's very real. This is the part of the relationship where your emotional intelligence is tested because you're being asked to see past the behavior and into the underlying wound that drives it. But don't confuse this with being responsible for fixing them. Your job is not to be their therapist. Your job is to recognize what's happening so you don't take it personally. Because what breaks most people in relationships with avoidance isn't the distance, it's the story they tell themselves about why it's happening. They don't care. They're trying to get rid of me. I must not be good enough. When in truth, they might be saying, I care so much, it's scaring me. This is emotional warfare disguised as connection. And the avoidant, though they don't always realize it, is trying to earn your love in reverse. They think if I push you and you don't leave, maybe I'm finally safe. Maybe this time love won't betray me. But they don't have the tools to ask that question directly. So they ask it in the only language they know. Distance, detachment, conflict. If you've ever been in this moment where someone goes from warm to cold, close to distant, calm to combative, don't react. Observe. Ask yourself, is this a sign of a disinterested person? Or is this someone who's terrified that love might actually be real this time? And yes, this requires maturity. This requires boundaries. Because you don't respond to this by becoming a doormat. You respond with clarity. You say, I see what's happening. I'm not your enemy, but I'm not here to play games either. I'll give you space if you need it, but I won't beg and I won't chase confusion. That's how you stay rooted in your power without abandoning compassion. Here's the paradox. The moment an avoidant starts pushing you away might be the exact moment they're finally feeling something real. And because they've never had the emotional blueprint for safe connection, they test the structure to see if it holds. And if you can hold your ground without collapsing, if you can see through the smoke without walking into the fire, you send a signal more powerful than any words could offer. I'm not here to hurt you, but I won't lose myself trying to prove it. Sometimes the people who test you the hardest are the ones who need to believe you won't disappear. And in that moment, your calm becomes the proof they didn't even know they were looking for. Let's decode one of the most misread signals in relationships with avoidance. The moment they say, I need space, that phrase alone has caused more heartbreak, confusion, and self-doubt than almost anything else in modern connection. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of it, you probably felt like the person you were building intimacy with just pulled the rug out from under your emotional reality. But let me challenge your perception for a second. What if that request for space isn't abandonment? What if it's an emotional overload response? Because for an avoidant, intimacy isn't relaxing, it's activating. And when someone tells you they need space, especially an avoidant, what they're really saying is, something in me is struggling to handle how deeply I'm feeling you. The average person interprets space as disinterest, but avoidants often use distance as a form of emotional regulation. Their nervous system is wired for detachment because it's been conditioned, whether through childhood neglect, enmeshment, or betrayal, to believe that closeness equals danger. So when love enters the room, they don't lean forward like most people. They back away. Not because they don't care, but because they care more than they can safely hold in that moment. This is where the psychological rubber meets the road. You think they're pulling away because you said something wrong. You obsess over your last text, your last call, your last moment together. But the truth is, it's not about what you did. It's about what you activated. Avoidants don't leave because love is absent. They leave because love is present. And it stirs up all the unprocessed emotions they've worked their entire lives to avoid. Emotions like dependence, vulnerability, loss of control. These are not comfortable states for someone who survived by maintaining emotional independence. And when those states arise, they reach for the only coping mechanism they trust, silence. Now here's the kicker. When they go silent, they're not forgetting you. In fact, their mind often becomes more consumed by you. Your presence in their headspace intensifies precisely because your physical presence is no longer there to contain the emotional overwhelm. That's the irony of the avoidant retreat. The more they try to distance themselves from the connection, the more mentally entangled they become with it. They feel safer loving you in your absence than in your presence. They feel more in control when they're watching you from afar than when they're standing face to face with the depth of your love. But let's not romanticize this too much. It can be deeply painful. It can feel like emotional whiplash. And if you're not anchored in your own self-worth, you'll start trying to fill the silence with over-explaining, over-chasing, or worse, over-blaming yourself. And that's where people lose their power because they take the space personally, but the deeper truth is their need for space is often a reflection of their internal disorganization, not your inadequacy. And yet, there's something powerful that happens when you don't react to the silence, when you don't panic, when you understand that space for them is not always an exit strategy, it's a pause for survival. That doesn't mean you accept emotional inconsistency forever, but it does mean you stop assigning meaning that doesn't belong to you. This is emotional maturity at its peak. It's the ability to see through their survival response without collapsing into your own. When they pull back, you don't chase. When they get quiet, you get grounded. You recognize that love, real love, often brings up everything in a person that wasn't healed. And for the avoidant, the deeper the connection, the louder the alarm inside them rings. So when they say, I need space, don't hear, I don't love you. Hear, I'm overwhelmed by how much this matters. And if you can meet that moment with grace instead of panic, with patience instead of pressure, you create a different kind of safety, one they didn't even know they were searching for. You show them that love doesn't always mean losing themselves, that closeness doesn't have to come at the cost of freedom, that space, when honored properly, can actually foster connection, not destroy it. Sometimes silence isn't a goodbye. Sometimes it's a cry for a different kind of intimacy, one that respects their limits while still holding the door open. And the people who learn to hear what isn't said are the ones who truly understand what love means. Now, let's look at one of the most self-destructive behaviors you'll witness in avoidant attachment: sabotage. It's maddening, right? Just when the connection feels real, just when vulnerability starts to peek through the cracks, they flip the script. They get critical, distant, passive-aggressive, or worse, completely disengaged. You're left wondering, what just happened? We were doing so well. But here's the psychological twist that most people never see coming. Avoidants don't sabotage because they want out. They sabotage because they don't believe something this good can possibly last. The very thing they've longed for, the intimacy, the stability, the emotional closeness, is the thing that also threatens their internal belief system, because when something feels too good, they don't celebrate it. They scan it for danger. This isn't about logic. It's about wiring. It's about emotional memory. Most avoidants grew up in environments where love was conditional, inconsistent, or overwhelming. So their nervous system doesn't interpret love as safety. It interprets love as a trap, a loss of self, a doorway to inevitable disappointment. So instead of trusting joy, they preemptively destroy it. Why? Because if you blow it up yourself, at least you're in control of the explosion. That's what makes sabotage so deceptive. It's not hatred, it's not cruelty. It's fear disguised as protection. And because the avoidant doesn't know how to sit with the vulnerability that connection demands, they default to the one thing that feels familiar: distancing tactics. They nitpick, they provoke, they act indifferent. Not because they've stopped caring, but because they're trying to prove to themselves that it wasn't real to begin with. It's their way of cushioning the fall they're convinced is coming. This is why you'll see avoidants turn cold after the most emotionally rich moments. You have a deep conversation, you feel seen, something clicks, and then suddenly they retreat. That retreat isn't rejection. It's emotional whiplash caused by a nervous system that doesn't trust sustained closeness. Love, to them, doesn't just feel foreign, it feels unsafe. It's important to understand this if you're going to hold your own power in the dynamic. Because if you don't, you'll start believing that their sabotage is your fault. You'll take the bait, you'll try harder, you'll get caught in the loop of proving your worth, when in reality, what you're seeing is their inner child screaming, if this is love, I don't know how to survive it. Here's the truth, people only sabotage what they secretly value. You don't see people sabotaging meaningless flings or surface level attention, but when something strikes the heart, when it threatens to awaken real intimacy, that's when the avoidance alarm system activates. So ironically, the moment they start pulling away, starting conflict, or going silent could be the moment they realize this means something, and that should radically shift how you respond. Not by tolerating emotional abuse, not by playing therapist, but by recognizing the difference between rejection and regression. Because if you don't know the difference, you'll either chase what's collapsing or walk away from something that was never meant to end. It just needed healing. Now, healing doesn't happen by fixing them. It happens by refusing to abandon yourself. It happens by holding the mirror up without shrinking in guilt. When they start the sabotage cycle and you respond with grounded self-respect, you send a new signal into the emotional dynamic. You say, I see you, I care, but I will not play out your past with you. And that's what avoidants need most. Someone who can see their chaos without joining it. Someone who can stand calmly while they wrestle with the war between love and fear. Not to save them, but to show them that not everyone leaves and not everyone controls. You won't save every avoidant, and you shouldn't try, but what you can do is stop personalizing their pattern. What you can do is stop internalizing their resistance as proof of your inadequacy, because the sabotage wasn't aimed at you. It was aimed at the part of themselves they've never made peace with, the part that doesn't believe they're worthy of healthy love. Sometimes the most destructive act in love isn't hate, it's fear in disguise. And the greatest power you'll ever hold is the ability to recognize the storm isn't about you and still choose to stand in your truth. Let's talk about one of the most misunderstood moments in the avoidant love cycle, the return, that unexpected message, that late night I was thinking about you, that reappearance after weeks or months of silence. And here's where most people get it wrong. They think the avoidant comes back because they're confused, because they're bored, because they miss the attention, but that's not what's really happening. The avoidant doesn't return because they suddenly forgot why they left. They return because your absence revealed something their fear couldn't let them see in your presence. That distance gave them clarity, not about who you are, but about what you meant. See, when an avoidant pulls away, they're not running from you. They're running from the vulnerability that connection triggered. But in that space, without your voice, your energy, your emotional mirror, they begin to feel the impact of what they pushed away. And here's where the psychology gets rich. Avoidants are emotionally delayed processors. While the anxious person feels everything in real time, the avoidance suppresses and compartmentalizes. But suppression isn't deletion, it's storage. And when the noise fades, when life gets quiet, all those stored emotions start to surface. And suddenly, they're not just remembering you, they're feeling you, probably for the first time without resistance. What they couldn't face when you were near becomes undeniable when you're gone. And that's the internal contradiction that breaks them. Because in the moment They convinced themselves they needed space. They convinced themselves they were protecting their peace. But once you're gone, and especially when you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop showing up in ways that fed their avoidance, they're forced to sit in the very emptiness they swore they preferred. And it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like loss. Not the kind of loss that's about missing a warm body. It's the kind of loss that confronts their illusion of control. Because in walking away, or even just standing still, you've disrupted their emotional pattern. And now, for the first time, they're not the one managing distance. You are. That's why they come back. Not because they're unsure of how they feel, but because the silence became louder than the fear. They realized that what they thought was relief was actually grief. And here's the hardest part for them to admit. They didn't just miss you. They missed the version of themselves that felt seen in your presence. The one who could laugh without a mask. The one who softened. The one who didn't have to hide behind emotional armor. That version doesn't exist in solitude. It exists in connection. And your connection was the first time in a long time they felt it. Maybe ever. But don't mistake their return for readiness. Sometimes people come back because they miss the feeling, not because they've developed the tools to hold it. That's where you need discernment. Because the return of the avoidant isn't just a romantic moment. It's a spiritual and psychological crossroads. Are they back to repair, or are they back to relieve their guilt? Are they here to grow, or are they trying to rewrite the ending without rewriting the behavior? That's where your power comes in. Because this time, it's your turn to ask the hard questions. This time, you don't beg for clarity, you become the clarity. You don't collapse into their affection, you stand in your own worth. Because love isn't just about return, it's about recognition. And if they can't recognize what you are when you're gone, they don't deserve to have you back without deep reflection. But here's the gold in all this. When the avoidant returns, it proves something important. The connection was real. The feelings were real. And your silence wasn't wasted. It worked, not because it was a game, but because it gave space for truth to rise from the wreckage of fear. Sometimes they don't come back because they want to start over. Sometimes they come back because your absence became the first safe place where they could finally feel what love actually meant. And if that doesn't shake your understanding of love to the core, you're not listening deeply enough.